And this is my great pleasure to open today's webinar of the Logic and Religion Association. And I will pass the microphone to Professor Jean-Yves Bezieux, Vice President of LARA and a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Jean-Yves, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. So we are glad to have one more session of the Logic and Religion webinar today with Juan Diego Morales from the University of Cartagena in Colombia. And the title of his talk is God as a Hypothesis. So please, Juan, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you listen to me very well? Okay, thank you. So I will share my screen. Please, can you habilitate me?
You can now do it. Yeah, you can now do it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, are you seeing the presentation? Okay. So thanks very much for having me and for the invitation to talk about these issues that I am working on. And the title of my paper is God as Hypothesis. And so this paper, I will argue that religion implies the empirical and testable, although non-scientific hypothesis that God's personal and responsive action is non-reducible to and non-eliminable from the natural worlds. So it must be carried out on the basis of and complementing the causally open processes of nature. Much of the argument focuses on the thesis of the causal closure or completeness of nature. That on the inadvertently insufficient rationale of the tremendous success of contemporary science, most scientists, philosophers, and theologians accept. Some of them consciously either eliminating God or making her or his action only possible through natural causation, and some unconsciously by mistakenly relying that some kind of causal indeterminism would deny it. I showed that the consequences of the causal closure of nature are devastating for religion, making it ontologically and epistemologically dispensable. But in fact, the plurality of contemporary sciences supports a conception of the natural world as much more causally open, as constituted by different layers of causally powerful emergent systems that complement the causally open and incomplete processes of its lower levels. So I argued that God's personal action must be structured on this empirically based conception. I explained the objective but non-scientific conditions of the stability of this hypothesis, and finally, how it imposes a remarkable boundary to the scientific attempt of a completely natural explanation of the world. So I will argue for the idea that religion, and not only religion in singular, but religions in plural, imply an empirical and testable, although non-scientific hypothesis. In particular, that theistic religions such as Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Vaishnavism, the last one a personalist branch of Hinduism, which is my theoretically and practically preferred option, imply the empirical assertion that beyond creating and sustaining the nomological order of the natural world that science can explain, and beyond be the source and justification of our highest values, God produces on us and so the natural world different events and situations that constitute his or her guided personal and responsive action. In fact, the argument implies that every religious entity, agent, and phenomenon, spirits, for example, spirits, angels, and even sacred non-personal properties, states, or beings, as for example, the impersonal Hinduist Brahman and the Buddhist state of emptiness of nirvana, to the extent that these entities and phenomena and their causal actions are irreducible to and non-eliminable from the natural world. So the paper is divided into 4 parts. I will argue in the first part that I will argue about the false step that many authors, both scientists, philosophers, and what is more problematic from the epistemic and ontological status of religion in general, many theologians take as an entailment from the scientific success to the causal closure of nature. In the second part, I will speak about the epistemological and ontological consequences of the causal closure of the natural worlds, which are devastating for religion, concluding in its reduction or its elimination. Thirdly, I will argue that from the factual contemporary existence of multiple sciences apart from physics itself, the so-called special sciences, from chemistry to psychology, sociology, and economics, contemporary sciences support a more causally open world, and so the rejection of the principle of the causal closure of nature. And fourth, finally, I will articulate the factual, empirical, and religious, but non-scientific conditions of testability of the hypothesis that sacred entities, in particular gods, have a non-supernatural causal influence on the natural world. The first step. From scientific success to the causal closure of nature. Given the increasingly comprehensive and overwhelming success of modern science, most scientists, philosophers, and theologians accept both the empirical and metaphysical assumption of the principle of the causal closure or completeness of nature. That says, this principle says, if a physical or natural event has a cause at T, it has a sufficient physical or natural cause at T. For instance, David Papino's argument about the rise of physicalism and naturalism in the 19th and 20th centuries is clearly and fundamentally based on the acceptance of this principle, affirming that given that scientific development has shown that there is no sense to speak about Cartesian minds nor dualist vital principles, science has shown that every cause and explanation must be seen as purely physical and natural. Papino argues that science initially appealed to this principle implicitly, but that at the end of the 20th century, it is explicitly endorsed by science and articulated in philosophy in, for example, Jaron Kim's exclusion argument, which we will analyze in the next section. On the other side, on the theological side, some authors argued about the complete causal autonomy of nature. Another went to state the causal closure of nature on the supposed basis of the principle being a necessary condition for the natural sciences' capability to study and explain the natural worlds. If this is right, the function and relevance of religion and science must be finally independent. Religion's function being understanding versus science function of explanation. Whereas science explains how the world is causally and dynamically structured, religion focuses on promoting higher values such as justice, freedom, and love. And if it has any epistemic relevance at all, it's because it can give us understanding of the existence and meaning of our life and the world. Given the dominance of science, even authors who explicitly attempt to construct a more interactive approach, in which not only religious claims should be reformulated in the light of science, but scientific statements and assumptions should be responsive to religion, are hesitant whether they can pursue such enterprise. For instance, Arthur Peacock presents his version of the problem of God's action on the world as a major critical question in contemporary theology that can be formulated in such a way that in a world that is a close causal nexus, increasingly explicated by the sciences, how might God be conceived of as influencing particular events or patterns of events in the world without interrupting the regularities observed at the levels the sciences study? And John Hutt also says, God is not a hypothesis. Theology is not the answer to scientific questions, as the new atheists would like it to be, since this would make their job of destroying theology an easy one. But why? Why? Because according to these authors, the natural world is causally closed, and so science accounts for any causal and natural events in the world. This is the assumption that they maintain or accept. Second, the consequences of the causal closure of the natural world. We can know about the deep criticism that Jawan Kim has posed to any non-reductive explanation of mental and spatial sciences causation. In particular, he argues that the problem of causal exclusion for mental causation is to answer the question, given that every physical event that has a cause has a sufficient physical cause, how is a mental cause also possible? And we can reformulate the problem in theological terms. Given that every physical or natural event that has a cause has a sufficient natural cause, how is a divine or sacred cause also possible? In his case, he concludes correctly, I think, that the only viable but unsatisfactory options for a non-reductionist perspective are reductionism, eliminativism, or epiphenomenalism. In a word, causal and ontological exclusion. And this ontological result takes us to an epistemological exclusion, an entire natural explanation of the world. In particular, the complete natural explanation of human, presumably religious significant facts and actions. So we will achieve all our goals, for instance, justice, happiness, inclusion, and so on, purely on the basis of the all-encompassing knowledge of science. So a personal concept of God or about any other sacred entity wouldn't have any function to do. This would be the culmination of the modern attempt to desacralize the world. Furthermore, against what many authors have tried to argue, it's not sufficient to appeal to any causal indeterminacy within the natural world, whether at the level of quantum physics, chaotic systems, or any other natural phenomenon. This is because indeterminacy is not and does not imply causal openness or incompleteness. I call this openness under determination. My second, please. In fact, we have formulations of both natural causation and the causal closure of nature in completely objective but non-deterministic or probabilistic terms, given that we recognize that the natural world could be finally and irremediably non-deterministic. This is, for example, Brian McLaughlin's formulation of the principle of the physical causal closure. For any caused physical event P, there is a chain of entirely physical events leading to P, each link of which causally determines its successor, or determines the objective probability of its successor. In the same direction, Papineau, in his article about naturalism in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, says, even if quantum mechanics implies that some physical effects are themselves undetermined, it provides no reason to doubt a quantum version of the causal closure thesis, to the effect that the chances of those effects are fully fixed by prior physical circumstances. And this alone is enough to rule out sui generis non-physical causes. For such sui generis causes, if they are to be genuinely efficacious, must presumably make an independent difference to the chances of physical effects. And this in itself will be inconsistent with the quantum causal closure claim that such chances are already fixed by prior physical circumstances. Once more, it seems that anything that makes a difference to the physical realm must itself be physical. These are the consequences of assuming the causal closure of nature. Three, emergence and the possibility of divine action. So, in fact, the principle of the physical causal closure expresses the usually attributed metaphysics of modern science and its use of purely analytical, atomistic, and reductionist methodologies, according to which the objects and phenomena of the world are seen as the logical or mathematical function of their parts. This is the metaphysical perspective of reductionism, which has been called microphysicalism. But a central challenge for this reductionist understanding is that contemporary sciences, at least as far as we know, conceive our world as much more contingent and complex, as a world that is constituted by different integrated and holistic systems. The philosophical and scientific theory of emergentism, in the same line as complex and dynamic system theories, affirms that some physical, chemical, biological, human, and or social systems are ontologically and causally emergent. That is to say, ontologically and causally fundamental, in the sense of being not completely grounded in and so non-reducible to their parts and still dependent on them. One of the commonly recurring examples that seem to show the empirical existence of holistic or emergent natural systems is the phenomenon of quantum entanglement. But this does not seem to be an isolated phenomenon. Within the scope of both the physical science itself and its interaction with chemistry, we find numerous examples of non-quantum irreducible holistic properties, as far as we know today. And there seems to be also evidence of emergence beyond the physical and chemical scopes in the interactions between chemical and biological systems, and between the neural and mental levels of organization, and between psychological and social levels. If this kind of evidence finally ends up being correct, what is a completely empirical issue, this is important to have in mind, it's a completely empirical issue, emergence and downward causation should be much more common than normally supposed. Under this perspective, the lower level processes are causally underdetermined. That is to say, causally open in such a way that the higher level processes can complement them without suspending, modifying, or violating them. I have developed an emergentist articulation of the aging causal libertarian perspective about free will and moral responsibility based on this idea of causal underdetermination and openness in the paper that was published in Synthesis last year, 2023. But what is relevant for our current purposes is that, according to this perspective, the lower level causal laws, powers, and processes from which the emergent powers and processes arise are causally underdetermined, not simply undetermined. That is, they are open and complete and incomplete in such a way that the latter can complement them without suspending, modifying, or violating them. In such a way that gaps can and must be understood on pain of being ontologically and epistemologically skewed as incorporating a divine, non-natural or supernatural layer of causal relevance that emerges from the natural levels of reality, in such a way that it complements the causally open natural order and laws without suspending, modifying, or violating them. Four, Guts as hypothesis is factual but non-scientific conditions of testability. From the above considerations, we have to say that theistic religions should be understood as implying empirical and testable, although non-scientific hypotheses that, beyond creating and sustaining the nomological order of the natural worlds that science can explain, and beyond being the source and justification of our highest values, God produces on us and so the natural world different events and situations that constitute his or her direct personal and responsive action. That is a non-scientific hypothesis with objective, empirical, and religious, but not scientific conditions of testability. For understanding this, for understanding why this cannot be a scientific hypothesis, we should resort to the so-called thesis of methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism is understood as the empirical and non-dogmatic rule of scientific practice, whereby science should regard the natural world as following objective, autonomous, and uniform processes. So it cannot appeal to miracles or other supernatural interventions that break or interfere with this process. So here we find a crucial reason why God can be invisible to and so non-accountable by the naturalistic methodology of science. This is because he or she is understood as the paradigmatic person. And persons are, and with more reason, the divine person is fundamentally characterized by qualities, capacities, and conditions, which in principle, and to the extent that they are irreducible and non-eliminable, as the hypothesis maintains, don't follow the naturally objective, autonomous, and uniform dynamics required by the naturalistic, mathematical, predictive, objectifying, and potentially manipulative methodologies of science. Qualities, capacities, and conditions such as uniqueness, irreplaceability, incomparability, dignity, free will, intrinsic value, and being ends in themselves. Although divine action cannot be tested by the naturalistic methodologies of science, it still has objective, empirical, and religious conditions for its confirmation or disconfirmation. Its negative conditions of testability for its falsification will be a complete scientific explanation of the objective probability of human, individual, or social action. In particular, religious significant facts and actions, since this would falsify the religious claim that God personally guides and acts upon human lives, especially upon those who are under his or her presence, guidance, and will. Meanwhile, on the positive conditions, we can follow Nancy Murphy and speak about the fruits of reaching a personal interaction with God as existential, moral, behavioral, and psychological transformations, which cannot be accounted, predicted, or produced only by science. For example, humility, peacefulness, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. A second condition for testability, positive testability of the hypothesis, we can speak about the neural and probably domain-specific conditions, cognitive changes, and structures resulting from the aforementioned persistent moral and psychological transformations, which are not completely accounted by the sciences because their failure to appeal to divine causes. And three, we can say that a highly desirable result that be counted as a last positive condition for religious epistemic acceptance is the fulfillment of the religious promise that only in communion with God, or in general terms with the sacred, we can construct a better or more just and more inclusive world, even a world with thorough happiness, justice, and love. Some conclusions. So I have argued that divine causal influences on the natural world can and must be understood as a kind of empirical hypothesis, in pain of sacred and religious, ontological, and epistemic irrelevance, and that this hypothesis is non-scientific, given that gods and sacred entities in general don't follow the naturally objective, autonomous, and uniform dynamics required by the naturalistic methodologies of science, which has very important consequences for the limits of scientific explanation and research, the need to appeal to religious conditions as sources for the explanation of certain and relevant aspects of the natural world. Thanks very much for being here and for listening.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is open to question and discussion. Maybe Juan, you can close your PowerPoint so we can see the one with. Thank you very much. We can see the one with.
I will try. I don't know how to do that.
Here, Juan, I think you can click something like stop sharing the screen, something like this.
Here? Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. So now we have a question by Evan. Please, Evan Fields, you can go on.
Boy, where to start? That's an extremely interesting talk on what I think is an extremely difficult issue.
Yeah.
It's like you've sort of climbed Mount Everest here in half an hour or so. So there are a bunch of questions and points. A general point, and this is recognizing that you can't in a half-hour paper really cover everything that needs to be covered, but the notion of reducibility is crucial here, and there are competing conceptions of what reducibility amounts to, whether such a thing as top-down causation is even conceptually coherent. And in a fuller treatment of this, I think you would have to do a fair amount of setting the stage to make clear sense of this. One of the difficulties that you face is that is the problem of local conservation of energy and momentum. And that's a serious problem. Whatever you want to say about reduction, if you allow that there are non-physical entities, gods or spirits or whatever, that intervene in the physical world, whether it be quantum mechanical or classical, in ways that actually cause physical objects to move as they would not have moved without that intervention, then you have not just something that's a sort of an addition to the physical laws of nature. You have a violation, not just of any old law of nature, but of a couple of the most fundamental conservation laws that modern physics depends on. And so the challenge here is, or one challenge is, can you come up with an account that does not actually conflict with known science? The best effort that I've seen to do this is by Robert John Russell, who thinks that God, in effect, maybe you know this, God can collapse quantum indeterminate states, can collapse the wave function in ways that are commensurate with the probability predictions, but can be very surprising in some ways. So I've got a whole bunch of other things to ask, but I want to let other people in the line here. Let me ask what reactions you have to those observations.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivan, for your comments and your questions. What I have to say in principle is that the way to understand what I am proposing and the idea or the understandings we have to develop about the concept of emergence is a very detailed and very delicate issue, because as you said, and there is a very strong controversy about how to understand downward causation, for example, emergence causation and downward causation, and the possibility of irreducibility or the idea of real emergence properties, states, or systems. But I think that the crucial point is to understand what we are talking about downward causation, because I think that if we correctly understand this concept, we can see how is it possible that holistic or emergent properties or systemic properties can have a causal influence causal impact on the lower level processes, for example, quantum processes. Yeah. But so my proposal, my general proposal, I have trying to develop since some years ago, is to understand downward causation in terms of constraints, causal constraints, and their determination. So the idea is that given all the laws we have in quantum physics and the lower levels of nature in physics and chemistry and even biology, still, given that laws, still the courses of events of the lower levels are in some sense open, in the sense that the laws of the lower levels the laws of the lower levels don't completely determine which are all the possibilities that the courses of events will have in the future. So when these lower level components are related in certain ways, is that composing, for example, certain kind of systems, that the system as a whole acquires or exemplify a higher level constraint, a higher level property, a higher level condition that makes that the underdetermination of its components become directed in certain way. And if we can understand, I think that if we understand emergent causation, downward causation in this way, there is no problem to say that there is an irreducible, or that can be. I'm not arguing here about an empirical issue, because I am a scientist. I am a philosopher. I'm trying to be a philosopher. So what I am saying is, maybe the world is open at the lower levels. This is an empirical issue. As far as we know today, given the results that chemistry, for example, is not completely reducible to quantum physics, given that biology is not reducible to physics, at least as far as we know. There are no computational algorithms that allow us to modulate completely in terms of lower level factors. So as far as we know, these sciences are not reducible. So they allow a metaphysical understanding, a metaphysical reading of emergence. And I am taking this option as the best option we can have for a non-reductive perspective, and going beyond that for a divine perspective, in which God, in this sense, will act as an emergent property, as an emergent action, as an emergent system, God itself, or God himself, herself. And remember, one thing is important to remember, that God, in this proposal, God is not only acting as an emergent system. God is acting, creating the world, maintaining the world, and thirdly, as a system, as a holistic system. So it has at least three potential responsibilities, actions. They have to, it has to, or he has to produce.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Thank you. I mean, that's great. I mean, there's a much longer conversation we would have to have. Let me just tease it by saying that I agree that there are emergent properties. I think that if you allow downward causation, you destroy physics. Okay, so I mean, I'll leave that there, because that's a quite technical discussion, I know. But I'm one point where I'm going to dig my heels in is on this question of downward causation. I don't think you can make sense of that without destroying the explanatory structure of the sciences.
Thank you very much.
Ivan,
How we
but,
go?
but,
Yes.
okay.
We can go to the next question. So we have a question by Ruud Schumann, please.
Hi, thank you, Yves, and thank you, Juan, for the talk. In the conclusions, you say divine causal influences on the natural world can and must be understood as a kind of empirical hypothesis on pain of sacred and religious, ontological and epistemic irrelevance. But is that really so? Would God be irrelevant if he would not be causally involved in the natural world?
Yes. This is more or less the central point of the talk. Because what I'm trying to say is that if we follow the John King's objection about non-reducible mental causation or causation in the spatial sciences, and I think that he's right about his criticism. But what I am saying is he's right because we assume the principle of the causal closure of nature. That even Kim himself speaks about microphysicalism. He's not speaking about, for example, naturalism. He's not speaking about how the natural world is closed. He's saying that is when you find the last level of composition of reality, that is microphysics, quantum physics, or we don't know. Maybe next we will have a superstrings theory saying that there is something deeper and deeper and deeper. We don't know. But when you reach that point, the point is if you have this level, it must be closed for the other sciences and for the other causation at the higher levels. But assuming that principle, the conclusion is right that the other higher levels cannot have real relevant causation on the works. And if we follow this argument, we have to say the same about God. Because if we can have, if the world is completely causally closed, the natural world is closed. So at some point, on the one hand, causally speaking, God does not need to do nothing. Yeah. On the other hand, epistemically speaking, we will explain in the future, probably, we will explain everything, every action of people in terms of purely physical terms or natural terms you want. So we won't need the concept of God for explaining what happens with the people. So it
Yes.
will be irrelevant.
But this is, you're now turning the argument around.
Okay.
I'm supposing that God does not have any causal influence on the world. And I take natural in the wide sense, neither on the mental nor on the physical or material. So they're completely different realms. There's the natural world, including human beings and minds and everything. And there's the supernatural. And super means outside and above. I think they are not causally involved. One is a condition for the other, but not a cause. And I think that does not make God irrelevant, that he has no effect whatsoever on our life, our world, or our in the sense of that of human beings. Yeah, the relevance being that if we realize that we are God, then we are saved from the world, so to say. That's salvation. Divine union is salvation. And from that theory, I'm reasoning and asking, why would you say that it's necessary for God to have causal influence to be relevant?
Okay.
The inverse question, basically. I'm asking for the inverted argument of what you just said.
Yeah, I think that it's I would say that I am on the side of, more or less on the side of the naturalist realm, in the sense that, or not in the naturalist, but on the monist. I think that is, for me, is more intelligible monist conception of the world. Even if we don't speak physics, naturalism, or whether we have an idealist or panpsychist conception of the world. But I think that monism is more intelligible for me. And the problem that Cartesian dualism have about the interaction between the two things is very deep. But I know you are saying that there is, in your position or your perspective, what you are proposing, there is no need for causal interaction. But there is a point that some authors like to highlight, is what some call the Eleatic principle, or the Alexander's dictum, that says that something is real only if it has causal powers. And if you if you begin with that principle and you don't allow a causal interaction between different realities, it will be very difficult to say that in fact they are real entities. So, for example, if God exists and does not have a real interaction with us, a causal interaction with us, it would be dispensable, because we don't see what is the evidence, or what is the results of his existence. And so I prefer a monist conception, even a panpsychist conception, where even the material world is composed of certain psychics, substratum or something like that.
Yes. Well, to the last argument, if you argue that only things that are causal are real,
yeah,
it seems to me really funny, because then a cause disappears into the effect. So how can it be real in any ontological relevant sense, in the way we're talking in religion about God being real, for example? It's funny. Anyway,
yeah,
like even we're going beyond the talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a next question by Mauricio. Please, Mauricio.
Greetings to all, wherever you are. I try to make me apparent, but sometimes I lose the sound, and maybe I turn my video off. Congratulations, Juan. I think that you really had a tough question that for me is not philosophical, for me is scientific, and touch the deepest nature of psychological natures as human beings. See? So, but I think that there are a few things that it's not specific points, but for instance, reducibility, you're talking about reducibility of phenomena or of explanations. These are two different things. So you can...
Phenomena or what?
You can
Sorry?
One Sorry? Can you hear me? Hello?
Not so well, more or less.
Well,
Not so well, more or less.
more or less, yes, but for me it's clear. So I don't know. Let me turn off the phone again. Or turn off the video then. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now or not?
I think it's a little better.
So
I think it's a little better.
a little better. Okay. So let me be very slowly. So we can reduce one theory to another in physics, or you can reduce the explanation of biology to physics. This is one kind of reduction. And the other kind of reduction is to think that the phenomena of biology can be reduced to the phenomena of physics and chemistry. These are two different things. Because in theory, when and sometimes they are often very confused. One thing that is important that theories and explanations can only occur upon observations, what we observe, and not what we do not observe cannot be explained. Okay? And for instance, the quantum theories appear in physics due to the impossibility of observing the position and the velocity of a particle at the same time. So this has the physicists have created all a new theories, a new world. So
Mauricio, I am not listening well. Maybe it would be better that you can write. Maybe better that you can write. The connection seems that doesn't work.
About that later on then. Yeah, okay. So try to write to you and to read your paper before doing more observations about it. Sorry, I don't know what's happening.
So, will you answer, or you have something to say, Juan? So,
I didn't really understand much of what Mauricio were saying. So I prefer not saying because I didn't really understand. I'm sorry,
okay, so
Mauricio. Maybe you can write the question, or I will write my email. Maybe it would be very helpful for me to have your comments and your questions, and I can answer them.
Okay, so let's go to the next question. Don Wharton, who wants to ask a question, please. Your microphone is off. Okay.
Thank you so much. I just find myself in modest opposition to Juan's claim that there needs to be something outside the closure of scientific reality for us to have the feeling of the sacred and the blissful connection with others that entails perhaps implicitly the notion of an infinitely loving principle built into the structure of the universe itself. Obviously, what I would like to propose would require, much more than a half hour to fully elucidate. But, I don't see the logical requirement that one seems to be presenting here. But I do see the reason for him wishing to propose that. Obviously, much of the scientific community is factually asserting that religion is scientifically obsolete and should be dispensed with. But I would like to say that God is equivalent to things like truth and beauty. where truth has a formal logical structure that can be elucidated with clarity, and beauty can be asserted to be energy efficiency within the context of thermodynamics as it's currently understood. You know, I don't think it's fair to Juan to ask him to respond to what I'm claiming, because I don't have the ability to flesh out my claim in a way that he could comment on it. But I'm just saying, I'm just putting myself out here as someone who likes his desire to communicate something transcendental, loving, and having the clarity of values that is important for religious experience and connection to be real. But at the same time, I don't see the slightest problem with scientific closure in order to accomplish that. And thank you for letting me share my view on this.
Okay. So Juan, do you want to answer?
No, please. It's a beautiful perspective.
Thank you.
All right. Someone else want to ask some question? No?
I think Ivan has another question.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
I
Yeah.
don't want to double dip if someone else has a question. First of all, I want to suggest that I'm really quite sympathetic to Juan's project here. I think if you think about it, that the sort of crux question is whether something like Cartesian dualism is correct. And if so, whether we can make sense of it. I also think that it would be possible for there to be a natural world and a supernatural world which are not causally connected. That, ontologically speaking, seems to me to be an option. The problem is the epistemology. If they're not causally connected, I don't see how you can gain knowledge of them, unless you make this last sort of move, which is to suggest that God is some kind of abstract being, like beauty or some universal or some numbers, some numerical thing. But I have a more focused question here now, which has to do with quantum entanglement. We all know that very rapid progress is being made now in the development of quantum computers. Quantum computing depends fundamentally on the creation of entangled states in which there's a superposition of what are called the eigenvalues. And suppose I build a quantum computer that's actually pretty good. Maybe it's got AI capacities and all of that. It exhibits what, empirically speaking, would be indistinguishable from choice making, etc. And I'm curious whether you think that my description is sufficient to attribute to that machine consciousness. That's the question.
Okay.
Maybe it's
Thank
an
you.
unfair question. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, but I have my own perspective about that. And I would say that if we can construct an algorithm, machine, or something like that that develops the complexities, the sufficient complexity to become an autopoietic system, a system that gives to itself a rule for action and rule for becoming a thing. It will be something. It will be a person, what we call a person, somebody that has intentions, beliefs, desires, and purposes, and
That's
I think
interesting.
that
Would it have to be, would it have to be baptized in order to be saved?
I don't know. It depends the tradition, the religious tradition you put the machine. I think.
Okay. More questions? If there are no,
It seems that there are some questions in the chat, but I cannot see it very well. Mauricio said all theoretical efforts to explain life that have some possibility of succeeding change causation into relational entanglement. I don't really understand what is the issue here. And Joaquin, can you read it, please, for me?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. Perfect.
This is a kind of logical question, because it's different to say if there is a cause, then there is a natural physical cause, or to say there is all causes are natural or physical. This is a big difference but one has to guess about it, I think. It's about the formulation of your principle on the slides.
I didn't really hear because what was a problem hearing or there. I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
You didn't hear me, or didn't you hear me?
At some moments, I at some moments I can hear when you ask, can you hear me? I listen you very well, but after that, the question was not clear to me.
I don't know.
Now I am listening.
So it's it's a kind of logical question. If there is a cause, then there is a natural physical cause, and this might be different. You know, the cause might be different from the natural cause. And otherwise, it would be something like causes are natural, physical. So all causes are natural, the same, so to speak.
Okay, what I understand of the question is that is a cause necessarily have to be natural or physical, and what I have to say is not that cause is a more general concept that is something doing something, and even we, for example, in the free will discussions, we speak or we discuss about whether an event is a cause or whether we can have objects being causes. For example, persons, not only their mental states or events, but the objects as themselves. And so the general concept of causation applies to everything, every entity, every event that can have an influence on the world. So God, for example, is a person, and it depends how you understand the idea of God. It depends. For example, you can have a pantheistic or panentheistic conception of God, or you can have a more traditional idea where God is apart from the natural world. In both cases, it is completely reasonable and intelligible to speak about God as being causing different things in time, for example. So the idea of cause is more general than natural causation. And in part, what I was arguing is that natural causation, for that being relevant for us, natural causation cannot be the only causal structure of the world. So the world must have a defined cause that exerts certain causal influences on the natural world. This is more or less what I was arguing.
Okay. You want to say something more, Juan, or conclusion,
No.
final? No, okay.
No, thanks
All
very much
right.
for being here, for listening. I'm very happy for that.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for the participation of everybody. So the next session of the webinar will be June 20. We will have a talk of Martin Grossi from the University of Bonn. The title of the talk is The Pneumatological Nature of Christian Political Theology. So everybody is welcome to attend next month, June 20. Okay, bye-bye.